And now, Earthkeeper proudly presents, best-selling author, brilliant researcher and visionary, Graham Hancock. The following presentation covers a topic that is both timely and controversial. It is articulately discussed with fascinating and compelling points regarding adult responsibility and human sovereignty. Graham Hancock reviews the history of visionary plant use and psychedelics throughout human history and the remarkable personal accounts and scientific studies of the inner explorations documented by scientists, shaman and academic researchers. Graham Hancock provides clear evidence that the responsible use of certain visionary psychoactive plants open higher dimensions of reality, dimensions that serve toward inner explorations, increased spiritual wisdom and creativity. And he diligently shows how these have been used by advanced civilizations of our past for the improvement of society and individuals in understanding life purpose and spirituality in exploration of the true nature of consciousness and reality. Hancock emphasizes and adamantly clarifies that he is not advocating drug use, rather, he is speaking of freedom of choice for responsible adult usage of visionary plants. And he absolutely opposes drug use for minors. Graham Hancock is a very kind, humble and spiritual individual, and we believe, one of the most forward-thinking visionaries, and intelligent minds on the planet. This video presentation is fascinating, and we ask that you view the complete contents, with considered discernment and an open mind. Filmed live at the 2015 Earthkeeper Stargate event before a highly responsive and open-minded audience of over 500 attendees in Denver, Colorado. This is an Earthkeeper Stargate video production. All copyrights duly reserved. Enjoy. And, Namaste.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the final day of the Earthkeeper Colorado Stargate Gathering. And what a day it is. We have a wonderful series of speakers and topics, fascinating topics, cutting edge, brilliantly presented. And the first one, the one that you're about to hear, is absolutely amazing. You're going to be glued to your seat, and there could be no better presenter than my dear friend Graham Hancock, and he will speak today about civilization and psychedelics. A round of applause for Graham Hancock.
Thank you, James. So, psychedelics and civilization. I have a constituency of people on my Facebook page. I think they're called trolls, who constantly accuse me of being a druggie. Okay, I mean, I've written 5 #1 best-selling books. I work 16 hours a day when I'm working, but you can write Hancock off completely because he's a druggie. Why am I called a druggie? Because I wish to talk with an open mind about an issue that is controversial in our society. Let me be absolutely clear. I am not here to advocate drugs. I am here to advocate adult responsibility. And the fundamental responsibility that we should have as adults is the right to make decisions about our own bodies, our own health, and our own consciousness. It is not healthy philosophically for those responsibilities to be taken over by the state. If we hand over the responsibility for our health, our consciousness, and our bodies to the state and say, the state knows best, we will do exactly what it tells us to do, I think we're making a huge philosophical error. And I think it can be very damaging, not only to ourselves, but to the future of the human race. After all, what does the state really have to recommend it? The states around the world, governments around the world, as far as I can see, are run by self-serving liars. Self-serving liars who are in the business of deceit, who are in the business of mind control, of manipulating us through information, who are responsible for huge amounts of tragedy and chaos in the world today. So when they seek to intervene in the inner sanctum of our consciousness and to tell us what we may or may not do with that most intimate, most sapient, most private part of ourselves, I think they are transgressing a fundamental human right. And it is in the area of drugs that that transgression becomes very evident. It isn't the only area in which governments transgress on our personal sovereignty, but it's an area in which it becomes transparent. So I want to couch this in a larger context of cognitive liberty, that we as adults must be free to make decisions about our own consciousness, our own health, and our own bodies, for right or for wrong, so long as we do no harm to others. I am not advocating drugs. I repeat, I am advocating adult responsibility. Drugs are not for children. But one of the problems with the so-called war on drugs is that it allows drugs to be made available to children, and made available by the worst people on our planet, the criminal gangs, the drug lords, who are delivering powerful drugs directly to our children. If we want to protect our children from the dangers of drugs, and there are many dangers with drugs, if we want to protect them, then the best way is to legalize drugs and to have an open and honest conversation about them. I'm going to be talking mainly, but not exclusively, about psychedelics today, and I'd also like to make clear that psychedelics are a very serious matter. I do believe that it is an adult's right to make the choice to use psychedelics or not, and to use them for whatever purpose they wish. That's not my business. But my advice would be to adults considering working with psychedelics, these are not for recreational purposes. This is about deep, serious personal work, and we abuse these sacred medicines, in my view, if we use them as recreational aids. That's not what they're for. So let's go, just to show you how things have changed. Let's go to this school in ancient Egypt. Gosh, I'm getting hot. I'm going to take my jacket off. I wear my suit to prove I'm not a druggie. Okay, yes. This is curious. This certainly could not happen in our society, but in this school in ancient Egypt, they found, it was from the Greek period, from the Ptolemaic period, and they found writings in Greek on the walls of the school, which actually included positive references to drugs in context of a story from the Odyssey about the Trojan War. Helen of Troy gives her guests a drug, it was most probably opium, that takes away grief and anger and brings forgetfulness of every ill. Whoever should drink this down when it is mixed in a bowl would not let fall a tear down his cheek in the course of that day, at least. You can immediately see that there's a different attitude to those substances that we call drugs in ancient Egypt 1,700 years ago. And sticking with the poppy and opium for a moment, it's intriguing that at Heraklion in Crete you can actually see images of a poppy goddess. You know, wearing the poppy with the cuts in the side on her headdress, and a gold signet ring from Knossos, 1500 BC. Demeter hands 3 poppy heads to Persephone. Let's see if I can remember this. In Xanadu did Kublai Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. Samuel Taylor Coleridge. This fragment, with a good deal more, not recoverable, composed in a sort of reverie brought on by 2 grams of opium in the fall of the year 1797. It's a famous story, actually. He was writing Xanadu, and there came a knock at the door. It was the postman. Coleridge went to collect the package, and by the time he got back to his chair, he'd forgotten all the rest of the poem. Ancient Egypt, never was there a culture that so deeply penetrated the mysteries as ancient Egypt. And it's very clear now that in their explorations of parallel realms, that the ancient Egyptians made use of sacred plants. I don't agree with William Emberden's title, because very few of these plants are narcotics, although certainly opium is. But the ancient Egyptians made use of many other visionary plants as well. We can see Nefertiti presenting an opium poppy to Akhenaten here. Very interesting is the blue water lily. It's a prevalent motif in ancient Egyptian sacred art. If we look left here, we'll see not only the blue water lily, but also represented as rays from the sun. This is the datura flower, which is, of course, a powerful and actually quite dangerous visionary aid, which has been used by Native American tribes as well for thousands of years. So this is the go-to book on the subject of the use of visionary plants in ancient Egypt. William Emberden is a great scholar, and he's investigated the matter in depth. And it's really, I believe, impossible to understand ancient Egypt unless we take account of the fact that the ancient Egyptians did use visionary plants. And they weren't just sniffing the aroma of the blue water lily. We know that because traces of a liquid extract from the blue water lily were discovered in alabaster jars stored in the annex of Tutankhamun's tomb. And indeed, there's the head of Tutankhamun emerging from a blue water lily. The ancient Egyptian tree of life, you can see this beautiful relief on the walls of the temple of Karnak in the hypostyle hall. And there we see the god Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing the name of the pharaoh Seti I on the tree of life, telling him that he has earned the life of millions of years, the immortal life. Now, what's intriguing is that my friend Dennis McKenna, the brother of the late, great Terence McKenna, Dennis is an ethnopharmacologist, and he has identified this tree of life. And what it is Acacia nilotica. And Acacia nilotica is rich in dimethyltryptamine, DMT, the most powerful psychedelic known to man. Now, some might argue that the ancient Egyptians would not have had the chemical knowledge to extract the DMT from the bark of the tree of life. It's a little bit of an operation to do that. But let us ask ourselves where we get the word chemistry from. Ancient Egypt was known as Kemet. The Arabs called it alchemit, alchemy, chemistry. The root of our word chemistry comes from the name of ancient Egypt. So I believe the ancient Egyptians would have had no difficulty in extracting DMT from the bark of the tree of life. And therefore, we can say that we know what the ancient Egyptians were smoking. Interesting, the second shrine of Tutankhamun. Look at these rays that are coming down from the stars into the brow, into the center of the forehead of the initiate here. It's a very mysterious scene. What is it all about? Because this is the seat of the third eye. This is typically the seat of the third eye in ancient art, which is associated with the pineal gland. I found this meme on the internet, but it's peculiarly useful. There is the pineal gland, the cone-shaped pineal gland found on the staff of Osiris. And here you can see the similarities between the pineal gland and the eye of Horus. And interestingly enough, the latest research really confirms that it is the pineal gland that produces our endogenous DMT. Because whether you like it or not, we are all illegal in this room. DMT is a natural brain hormone. And it has, it's been established with recent research that it's the pineal gland that produces it. So there's an interesting issue going on here with all this imagery. Let's go off to Tiwanaku. My goodness, the day that Santha took this photograph, I mean, I had a headache that day, which lasted for a week afterwards, because Tiwanaku is at 14,000 feet, and we found this crazy German pilot in La Paz, and he took us up in this little unpressurized aircraft, and we went up to over 18,000 feet without oxygen, and of course, Santha had to open the window. So we're zooming around Tiwanaku, and my head is pounding and pounding and pounding. Talk about altitude sickness, my goodness. Anyway, Tiwanaku, the Kalasasiya, the Akapana pyramid, an incredible ancient culture, and I believe much more ancient than archaeologists accept it to be. But here's an interesting thing. I just glanced by these yesterday, these monoliths from Tiwanaku. These are the kind of things where the Ancient Aliens show will tell you that these are alien ray guns in their hands, okay? But actually they're not. What they are has been firmly identified by Dr. Manuel Torres as snuff trays and other paraphernalia for the consumption of the powdered seeds of an Adenanthera colubrina, or an Adenanthera peregrina, which contain, again, the potent hallucinogen DMT. And this should remind us that Tiwanaku is close to the Amazon. Now, it used to be said that there were no pyramids in the New World as old as the pyramids of Giza, but that has been definitively disproved in the last decade with the excavations of Dr. Ruth Solis at Caral, which is about 60 miles north of Lima, where there is a gigantic pyramid complex that indeed dates back to 3000 to around 2500 BC, the same dating that is given to the Giza pyramids. Now, another old idea that Caral has got rid of it, the archaeologists like to feel that, you know, to have a civilization, you have to have a centralized state that makes war. So often I find with archaeology that archaeology is not looking at the past through a window, but looking at the past in a mirror, trying to project us onto the past. And this is a mistake, because this huge urban civilization around Caral developed without any warfare at all. They were extremely peaceful, peace-loving people, and they had a huge trading network, and amongst their imports, not accidentally, I suggest, were included hallucinogenic snuffs from the Amazon. Francisco de Orellana, intriguing character, one of the conquistadors of Peru. In the 1540s, he thought he would go with 20 of his guys on a little hunting expedition in the Amazon. They had a boat, they put it in the Amazon, they were planning a day out. The Amazon disagreed. 4,000 miles later, they ended up in the Atlantic Ocean. But here's the amazing thing. Orellana, as he made this journey, kept a diary, and he reported on huge cities in the heart of the Amazon, flourishing cities with incredible culture and beautiful, beautiful works of art. Well, afterwards, of course, nobody believed him. The Amazon was pristine jungle. How could it possibly have cities in it? It was inhabited by savages. Everybody knew that. And for centuries, it was believed that Orellana had made the whole story up, just to, I don't know, aggrandize himself. Until the tragic clearances of the Amazon that are now taking place have revealed the remains of those cities that Orellana talked about. Those cities were depopulated within 30 years of his journey. Why? Because of smallpox introduced by the Spanish. An utter decimation of the indigenous population resulted from that. But the peoples of the Amazon had found a way to create an urban civilization with its benefits associated with complete harmony with the natural world and no destruction of the Amazon. And somewhere way back, and it's thought to be about 11,000 years ago, somebody very clever in the Amazon invented terra preta. This is a mysterious, self-replicating, man-made Amazonian soil, which is filled with natural bacteria, and which was definitely a human creation, and which creates spots of intense fertility around the Amazon. Most rainforest soils are not fertile, and this is one of the reasons why it's just incredibly stupid to cut down the rainforest to plant soya beans, because without the leaf fall from the trees, the soil rapidly becomes infertile. But the terra preta soil is sought out to this day as the most, perhaps the most fertile soil in the world. Somebody very brilliant, way back in prehistory, invented this soil. And emerging also from the jungle are these huge earthworks, huge geoglyphs, circles and squares. And not only that, but also megaliths and stone circles are being found in the Amazon jungle. So, you know, we need to, just as we perhaps need to look under the oceans or under deserts for remains of lost civilizations, because these are places that archaeologists generally don't look. But remember, the Sahara Desert was fertile 12,000 years ago and green and filled with lakes. So also we should consider the Amazon as a place to look for the missing episodes in the human story. There are 150,000 different species of plants and trees in the Amazon. And the invention or discovery of ayahuasca is an extraordinary feat of ethnopharmacology, because ayahuasca depends on the virtues of two plants mixed together. And go figure how they found those two plants out of the 150,000, because neither of them will do very much for you on their own. But put together, they're extremely effective. By the way, curare, the nerve poison, is another mystery in that respect, which involves 11 plants. And again, how we are looking at highly sophisticated feats of ethnopharmacology here. See, ayahuasca, many of you will perhaps know this, but the active ingredient of ayahuasca is DMT, dimethyltryptamine again, and it's contained in the leaves of this plant, which is called Psychotria viridis. They call it chacruna in the Amazon. But if you were to make a tea or a brew with the leaves of this plant and drink it, you would get nothing but a stomachache. It doesn't do anything. It has no psychological psychedelic effect at all. And that's because of an enzyme in our gut called monoamine oxidase, which switches off DMT on contact. So you can't absorb DMT orally. You can take it as a snuff, or in the case of Rick Strassman's research at the University of New Mexico, you can give it as an intravenous infusion, and it goes straight to the brain. But taken into the gut, monoamine oxidase shuts it down, and it doesn't work. If you want it to work, what you need is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, and that's what's contained in the ayahuasca vine. The ayahuasca vine contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which switches off that enzyme in the gut and allows the active ingredient in the leaves to be absorbed orally. See, when you smoke DMT, it's like a 12-minute journey on a rocket ship to the other side of reality. And there's no compromise with it. Once you hit the dose, you are gone. You can exert your will all you wish. I'm sorry. There you go, into a completely other realm. With ayahuasca, there's much more negotiation with it. Ayahuasca is in many ways, much gentler, although it does cause vomiting and diarrhea, which a lot of us Westerners don't like very much. But with ayahuasca, there is a 4-hour reflective journey. And if you don't like what's happening, you can exert your will to a certain extent and stop it. You can often actually stop the visions just by opening your eyes. In the Amazon, they say the real intelligence in the brew lies in the vine, that there's an intelligent spirit resident in the vine, and that she has made use of the leaves in order to access our consciousness. So that's the mixture, the leaves and the vine. There is a very simple technology of making the brew. Basically, you smash up lengths of the vine, put them into a cooking pot, add 300 leaves of Psychotria viridis, put more lengths of the vine on top, add water, cook for about 24 hours, and then eventually you'll end up with, they often put it in plastic bottles these days, unfortunately, but you'll end up with this really disgusting brew, which is shuddering, has a shudderingly awful taste and smell, which will definitely, not every time, but usually causes us to vomit and have diarrhea as well. We regard that as undesirable in the West, but actually in the Amazon it's seen as a cleansing. It's seen as a cleansing out of both physical and psychic toxins that are necessary in order for the vine to do its work. There is one other combination of plants that work. The ayahuasca, there's another form of it called yahe. And that again consists of the ayahuasca vine and the leaves of another vine called Diplopteris cabrerana, which produces a subtly different journey from ayahuasca, but it's essentially very similar. Tastes better. So we have a remarkable feat of ethnopharmacology here, and we have a visionary brew which has been in use amongst all the peoples of the Amazon for more than 4,000 years. That's as far back as it can be traced archaeologically. I believe it actually goes back much further than that, but we can say it's been used for at least 4,000 years. I will return to ayahuasca a little later in this talk. Meanwhile, let's take a quick trip to Caral. Sorry, not to Caral, to Chavin de Huantar. Drive north up the coast from Lima, turn right after a couple of 100 kilometers and head up into the Andes on the most alarming road, which eventually will take you up over 14,000 feet, and then a bit down the other side until you come. This is a storm that Santa photographed in the Andes. There were bolts of lightning coming down all around us. You will eventually come to Chavin, and here's a quote from 1616. Near this town of Chavin lies a great edifice made of well-carved stones of notable grandeur. It was a huaca and the shrine of the most famous of the pagans, as Rome or Jerusalem is, to make their offerings and sacrifices, because the devil in this place gave them many oracles, and thus they came from all over the kingdom. Beneath the ground are great halls and rooms that certain stories they extend beneath the river and pass near the huaca, or the ancient shrine. Actually, there is incredible construction at Chavin. It is an amazing place, and a lot of it is underground. And in these underground galleries, you can come across this fellow who's got the sort of combination of a serpent and a human being. Quite scary. They call it the Lanzon. And you go down into these underground galleries. And what is now clear is that this huge, extensive area of underground galleries was created for one specific purpose. And that was for the peoples of Chavin to have powerful visionary experiences. And we know what they used. The people of Chavin made it clear in their art. Their psychedelic of choice was the San Pedro cactus, which contains mescaline, the same active ingredient that is found in the peyote cactus in Mexico and North America. And speaking of peyote, there's a deer with a peyote button from Monte Alban in Oaxaca, and a peyote bowl from western Mexico, and there's the peyote cactus. Again, these plants are being venerated as sacred. They're not being regarded by maybe the Spanish priests regard them as diabolical, but the indigenous people do not regard them as diabolical at all. They regard them as sacred plants that unite us with the universe. If we go to the Maya culture, incredible pyramid building culture of the ancient Maya, we will find that the Maya venerated psychedelic mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, and here are various images of psilocybe mexicana from the Mayan culture. Likewise, the Olmecs, the predecessors of the Maya, who carved these fantastic, as David Hatcher Childers showed us last night, these fantastic African-looking stone heads, and who were also responsible for this very early image of the feathered serpent, which was found at La Venta on the Gulf of Mexico. Why the Olmecs were also interested in psychedelics. There's an Olmec baby weir jaguar wearing an Amanita muscaria, a fly agaric mushroom cap. And Amanita muscaria, again, is a visionary mushroom. And then the Amanita muscaria mushroom transforming into the jaguar god. So they, again, leave us in no doubt that they regarded these plants as sacred and as important. If you read the Vedas, there's a mysterious substance referred to in the Vedas called soma. It was the way that the priest gained access to the divine realm. There's an enormous study being done by Gordon Wasson, which, as far as I'm concerned, definitively proves that soma was originally a brew made from the Amanita muscaria mushroom. I won't go into all the details here, but check out Soma, Divine Mushroom of Immortality, by Gordon Wasson. Let's go to Greece now. I think everybody would agree the foundation of Western thought is in ancient Greece. And the beating heart of ancient Greece was the temple of Eleusis, where were performed for at least 2,000 years the Eleusinian mysteries. Pilgrims came from not only all over Greece, but all over the world to participate in the Eleusinian mysteries. They were taken into a darkened space filled with corridors and passageways and chambers called the telestrion. But before they went in there, they were given a brew to drink. And inside the telestrion, they had powerful, transformatory experiences. And so many of the greats who attended Eleusis, who were initiates in the Eleusinian mysteries, wrote that these experiences transformed their lives. Here is Pindar. Happy is he who, having seen these rites, goes below the hollow earth, for he knows the end of life, and he knows its God-sent beginning. Plato, Aristotle, Sophocles, all drank the brew at Eleusis, and all experienced the revelation. And Sophocles wrote, "Thrice happy are those mortals who, having seen these rites, depart for Hades, for the afterlife. For them alone is granted to have a true life there." In other words, they experienced something in Eleusis that banished their fear of death, that they understood that life does go on, that it doesn't end with physical death. And again, fantastic research in which Gordon Wasson and Carl Ruck and others were involved. We know now what the kykeon, the brew that was drunk at Eleusis, was. And it was it consisted of barley and Claviceps paspali, which is a non-poisonous form of ergot containing LSD-like visionary alkaloids. These guys were tripping in the temple of Eleusis. So we shouldn't be surprised to find the use of psychedelics at the heart of so many advanced civilizations, because psychedelics appear to have played a key role in the emergence of modern human behavior. I've been over some of this before in other talks. Some of you may have heard my little point about this, but this is what I call 6 million years of boredom. This is the so-called ascent of man from the last common ancestor with the chimpanzee through to anatomically modern humans. Our ancestors became anatomically modern, so far as we know, round about 200,000 years ago. The earliest surviving fully anatomically modern skeleton is from Ethiopia. It dates 196,000 years ago. It's quite possible that there was earlier anatomical modernity, but we don't have evidence for it yet. Between then and the last common ancestor with the chimpanzee, you have, well, the first spark of light is the invention of stone tools about 2.5 million years ago. There's been a recent discovery that suggests it goes back to 3 million years ago. I mean, yeah, great, okay, they made stone tools, and they began to pass the tradition of making the stone tools down. But here's the thing, once they'd invented them, they stuck with them without change for more than 1 million years. Can you imagine that? No innovation, no lateral thinking. We've got this stuff, it works, we're just going to pass it down and keep on using it. We're not going to think again. And it's not going to think about it until suddenly they invent this, the Acheulean stone tool tradition, and lo and behold, it sticks for another 1 million years as well. So I have a feeling that these guys would not have been incredibly interesting dinner partners. The conversation, I suspect, would have been dull. And it remained dull, in my view, even after we became anatomically modern, because despite the anatomical modernity, despite the fact that they have the modern brain, they have the hardware, something seems to be missing in the software. And those anatomically modern humans of 200,000 years ago are frankly as boring as these guys. But then something happens, and it happens after 100,000 years ago. And it really switches on around about 40,000 years ago, when you get this incredible cave art being created. I've had the privilege to visit about 30 of the painted caves in France, and they are just unbelievable underground cathedrals. The atmosphere, the sound of the water dripping, the incredible paintings on the walls that seem to move as light catches them. It's just amazing. And of course, Picasso, when he first went into Lascaux in the 1940s, came out and told the reporters, you know, frankly, we modern artists, we've invented nothing. These guys were brilliant artists. Now, the oldest surviving cave art in the world depicts what are called therianthropes, creatures that are part animal and part human in form. From Frumani Cave in Italy, the horns of a bison or an aurochs and the body of a human being. And here a lion man carved in mammoth ivory from Hollenstein Stadel Cave in Germany. And here, from Chauvet Cave in France, we have a bison man straddling a large female figure who weirdly is depicted as headless, but her right arm is transforming into the head of a lion. Now, I don't need to tell you that this is not something we see in everyday life, okay? It's just not something we see in everyday life. We are looking at an image of transformation, of a shapeshifter, of an entity who's changing form. She's becoming a lioness. And then you go to South Africa and you can see humans transforming into antelopes. And these amazing figures, I wish I could point to all 3 screens all the time, but these amazing figures which have the heads of antelopes and the bodies of human beings, the one on the left has got 2 feathers growing out of his back as though he's about to sprout wings. I mean, once again, where did they get the inspiration for this stuff from? You know, where did they get it from? And then the geometrical patterns that you find, Lascaux, this grid between two ibexes, and these incredible flows of dots and shapes that run down the cave walls. 100 years of archaeology did not really crack the mystery of the painted caves. All kind of theories were put forward. For example, hunting magic. The idea was that those primitives, painted the animal they wanted to hunt, pierced with arrows, and that in that way they would capture its soul. They would be able to capture it and kill it. This idea is still prevalent today, and it's absolute nonsense. There is no relationship whatsoever between the animals depicted in the caves and the animals that were eaten in the area of the caves. And less than 2% of the animals in the painted caves are actually shown as pierced by projectiles. In Lascaux, they mainly ate reindeer. There's only one reindeer depicted at Lascaux, and it has the feet of a duck. So the breakthrough came really from the 60s, 70s onwards. Interesting results from the use of hallucinogenic drugs to induce altered states of consciousness. And before the war on drugs kicked in and stopped this research, quite a lot of research was done with human volunteers, and they were asked to describe their experiences and to depict their experiences. And very often they depict definite, distinct patterns, the sense of passing through a vortex into a seamlessly convincing parallel world where they encounter entities. This volunteer on mescaline in the 1960s encountered a man in a modern business suit with the head of a fox, who communicated with him. Well, that's just really not very different from the lion man and the bison man of the painted caves. And this is the hint that the art of the painted caves was visionary art. We are looking at the work of shamans. And shamans, the essence of shamanism is the altered state of consciousness. And the great work on this, the breakthrough work, has been done by Professor David Lewis Williams at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa, and he has really proved his case that the combination of these patterns and particularly these entities is really only produced in deeply altered states of consciousness. And there are some of David's very important books, of which the most important is The Mind in the Cave. And his model of what cave art is all about has gradually won over the rest of his colleagues, and I would say it's the dominant model today, and it's one of the few areas in which I find myself in complete agreement with mainstream archaeology. David would say that the evidence for psychedelic use in the caves is inherent in the art itself. It is the kind of art that visionary artists today still paint after experiencing psychedelics. But if we were in any doubt, the Salva Pasquale mural settles it for us. New Scientist trumpeted this as the earliest evidence for magic mushroom use in Europe. Of course, the evidence was there in the art long before, but here we have Psilocybe hispanica integral to the cave art. Now, it's a curious thing that at the same time that we started making that art, everything else that we human beings did changed dramatically. Suddenly we became smart. We became spiritual. We started burying our dead with grave goods, with food and with water. That wasn't happening before. That suggests that we have developed some idea that death is not the end, that the life of the individual goes on in some ways. Hunting strategies improved. There's a lot to suggest that this was the time when spoken languages first appeared. And without a doubt, this is the most significant change in the whole story of the evolution of human behavior. And it correlates with compelling evidence that our ancestors at that time were using psychedelic fungi and plants, that they manifested in their art. I cannot say for sure that the psychedelic experiences caused this transformation in human behavior, but I have a feeling they did. I have a feeling that it was a causative link. So, in the light of the evidence from the painted caves, we need to take a fresh look at ancient art from all around the world. It seems that psychedelics have played a much greater role in the story of civilization than has been admitted. So, for example, a Tolita ceramic from Ecuador. Look what's happening to the arm of this figure. It's transforming into a serpent. So like that image of the woman's arm transforming into the head of a lion from the painted caves. And here, a bird-headed figure seated on a throne. That's Maya, an Olmec stone figurine with feline features. These combinations are diagnostic of experiences in deeply altered states of consciousness. Let me be clear, psychedelics are not the only way to produce deeply altered states of consciousness. There are other techniques. You can, like the Kalahari Bushmen do, you can dance around a fire for 24 hours, and you will eventually enter a deeply altered state of consciousness. Meditation can do it. You know, it seems that the universe has taken what I would call a belt and braces approach to ensuring that we have the opportunity to experience altered states of consciousness, including our beautiful planet growing these amazing plants which will allow us to enter those states on demand. Let's look at some other ancient art. Theseus and the Minotaur, this bull man wrestling with a lion from Akkad, these figures from Mesopotamia, and of course all of ancient Egyptian art is classic visionary art. No doubt about it. That's the only place where you see this kind of entity, is in those deeply visionary states. And weird thing is, those entities speak to you. They communicate with you. They communicate with you telepathically. I know it sounds crazy. Can I ask, it's a private issue, of course, don't feel obliged, how many in this room have experienced ayahuasca? Quite a number, quite a number. Yay. and I won't enter your private world, but I bet quite a few others have experienced perhaps psilocybin or some of the other major psychedelics. Entities that communicate with us and perhaps teach us. It's why I called my book Supernatural Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind. That was the subtitle. So with this huge history of mankind embracing psychedelic visionary plants, why is our society so rabidly furious about consciousness-altering drugs and plants? You know, we think that we are the norm, but actually in the frame of history, we are the aberration. The whole story of history has been about the sacred embracing of visionary plants, and it appears to have played a key role in the evolution of modern human beings. So why are we so crazily suppressing these plants today and surrounding them with all kinds of ideology and demonology? You know, it's a serious criminal offense to possess DMT in our society, whether in smokable form or in the ayahuasca brew, and yet it's a natural brain hormone. You know, you can have your life ruined for possessing DMT. You can have your door broken down. You can have your liberty taken away for decades for the simple possession of that natural substance. What is it? Why is this justified? Why is this okay? Why is it okay for our society to step away from the whole story of human history and claim that we are the only ones who've got it right? And it's so hypocritical, you know, because I mean, it's not as if our society is against altered states of consciousness as such. You know, we license large pharmaceutical corporations to make billions of dollars every year with consciousness-altering drugs. Whether it's, you know, and there's an unholy alliance between psychiatrists and big pharma to invent ever new mental conditions, you know, which the big pharma must then create a new pill from. And all of these pills are, by definition, consciousness altering. So we're not against altering consciousness per se. Look at our love affair with alcohol. You know, I mean, yeah, sure, some alcohol tastes nice, but let's be honest here. Most of us who drink alcohol in one form or another are not primarily drinking it for the taste. We are drinking it for the buzz. You know, the slight alteration in consciousness, the relax, the relief at the end of the day. Whoa, it's a consciousness-altering drug, and it's a bloody dangerous consciousness-altering drug. The road accidents, you know, the cirrhosis of the liver, the huge effects on health that alcohol has. So all the arguments that our governments are protecting us from the negative health effects of psychedelics by sending us to jail for using them, you know, become meaningless when we look at the way that alcohol is glamorized in our society. If our governments really cared about our health, then we would be getting much stronger messages about alcohol. But alcohol's right out there, and it, you know, it causes terrible social problems. Actually, many different states of consciousness are available to us. And our society particularly values and glorifies the alert, problem-solving state of consciousness. And it's in a social framework of top-down control. Now, let me be clear. I have nothing against the alert, problem-solving state of consciousness. It's a very important state of consciousness. When I get in an aeroplane, I would like my pilot to be in an alert, problem-solving state of consciousness. I would like him to have been in that state of consciousness for at least 24 hours before he gets behind the wheel. And I'd like him to stay in it all the way through the flight. After we land, his life is his business. But when he's flying me across the skies, I want him alert and problem-solving. It's a good state of consciousness, nothing wrong with it. The problem is that our society has elevated this state of consciousness to a monopoly position, where it becomes the only sanctioned state of consciousness, really. And except for the alcohol and the antidepressants, I would say they're tolerated because they don't challenge, they may even support the dominance of the alert problem-solving state. But psychedelics, what they do is they lead to the questioning of the established control system. This is undoubtedly the case in our society and the states of consciousness that serve it. Now, here's the bit where I get really controversial. Please don't walk out. I'm going to report a bit about the Gnostics, okay? And I want to be clear that the Gnostics highly venerated the figure of Christ. Christ was an incredibly important figure for the Gnostics, and they saw him as a true Gnostic teacher who had come to deliver us from the hands of the entity that they called the demiurge. So Christ is highly regarded in the Gnostic framework, but not necessarily the organizations that subsequently attached themselves to the name of Christ. It's very clear that the Gnostics made use of psychedelic fungi and plants. They made use of psychedelic mushrooms. Were it not for a discovery that took place near here, near the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, at a place called Nag Hammadi, we wouldn't know anything about the Gnostics really, apart from what those who persecuted them chose to tell us. But a cache of Gnostic texts was found buried at Nag Hammadi. They'd been buried there from about the 4th century AD, when persecutions of the Gnostics began, until 1945. And these are the Nag Hammadi library, the text of the Nag Hammadi library. And I highly recommend to get hold of the latest edition with James M. Robertson as the editor and check out the Nag Hammadi texts. They're extremely interesting and deeply disturbing in some ways. I just don't have time to go in depth into the whole Gnostic philosophy here. But the idea that Gnostics had a hatred of the physical world is incorrect. That is one of the ideas that the heresiarchs, those who persecuted them as heretics, spread. How could they have a hatred of the material world when what they venerated most of all was the goddess, Sophia, who had... There is this realm of pure spirit called the pleroma, inhabited by the aeons, of which Sophia was one. They're most like the ancient Egyptian gods and goddesses, actually. And in the Gnostic scheme, she envisages or dreams a singularity, which is the anthropos, which is mankind. And in the process, she falls into matter, and she manifests as our planet. She is the goddess of our planet. She manifests as our planet. But her fall creates a cosmic accident. And in that cosmic accident is created an entity called the demiurge. And the demiurge detests the divine spark in man and wants to enslave and keep mankind in darkness. And this is where it gets controversial, because the Gnostics believed that the entity we've been taught to call God isn't God at all. They believe he's the demiurge. That the greatest trick the devil ever played was not to convince the world that he didn't exist, as they say in the movie The Usual Suspects. The greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world that he is God. Dynamite stuff. So, Yahweh, Jehovah, Allah, he's the God. He's the demiurge as far as the Gnostics were concerned. And he's the chief of the archons. These are evil angels who are all employed in suppressing the divine spark in man. And he envies that divine spark within us, and he and his archons seek to mislead and enslave mankind and work to prevent us from ever awakening to our true potential. Thus they spread fear, hatred, and suspicion amongst us and drive us into all manner of reckless crime, into wars and frauds and all things hostile to the nature of the soul. I emphasize again, there is no attack on Jesus Christ in Gnosticism. Jesus Christ is regarded as a crucial, key Gnostic teacher, filled with love. You will not find anywhere in the words of Jesus Christ, you will not find anywhere the instruction to go burn a fellow human being at the stake. In some way, the edifice of Christianity got hijacked by another force. That's what the Gnostics are saying. So the Gnostic story of the Garden of Eden, they turn everything upside down the way we're taught it in the Old Testament. We're taught that the serpent is the bad guy, okay? And God wants to keep us in this pristine state of ignorance, and the serpent comes along and persuades us to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. From the Gnostic point of view, we absolutely had to do that. That we have to have knowledge of good and evil. It's essential for the progress of the soul. If you don't have that knowledge, you can't make choices. And it's our choices that define us. That's how we grow and develop and perfect ourselves as spirits from the Gnostic point of view. So, unlike the story of the Garden of Eden as we're told it in the Old Testament, in the Gnostic Gospels, the serpent is a liberator of mankind, a Gnostic teacher who's teaching us crucial information. And we know what happened to Adam and Eve after that they were driven out of the garden. They were driven out and humiliatingly beaten upon the bottom by angels with swords and sent off into the wilderness. And angels were posted at the sides of the Garden of Eden to prevent us from ever getting back in. We must never get back in. And there's a really eerie passage in the book of Genesis where he drives us out. And the entity says why we're driven out of the garden. They've eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But what happens if they eat of the tree of life and become gods like us? Who are those us that are spoken of in that passage? The flood. According to the Gnostics, it wasn't inflicted to punish evil. It was inflicted to punish us for having risen so high and to take the light, the gnosis that was growing amongst men. And the survivors were thrown into great distraction and a life of toil so that mankind might be occupied with worldly affairs and might not have the opportunity of being devoted to the Holy Spirit. And throughout history, those who've sought the liberating gnosis, the knowledge, the light, the true nature of things, have been persecuted. And let me quickly mention the Cathars in southwestern France, who were a reawakening of the Gnostic system of thought that was suppressed originally in Palestine and Egypt in the period of about 400 AD, never completely died, and it reestablished itself in southwestern France in the form of the Cathars. Cathar society was an unbelievably beautiful society. Can you imagine in the 1200s a society that openly advocated absolute equality of men and women? That's what the Cathars did. Can you imagine a society in the 12th century that advocated universal literacy? At that time, it was a crime to possess even a Bible. Universal literacy that went around with teachers teaching literacy so that people could be liberated through knowledge. The only problem was that the Cathars regarded the Pope as the devil's agent on earth. And that was a very dangerous thing to do in the 12th and 13th centuries. And the result was the Albigensian Crusades, named after the town of Albi, one of the Cathar towns, where this horrible crusade was sent down to wipe out the Cathars, and they were subjected to genocide. They were just utterly destroyed. They did put up a fight, but they were up against a massively powerful enemy. And at the end of it, all their books were burned and destroyed. There were mass burnings of the Cathars themselves. I mean, consider what it takes to take a fellow human being, tie that human being to a stake, and burn them slowly to death in the name of God. Something is going seriously wrong here. This is an act of human sacrifice that's taking place. And nothing ever, in the words of Christ, sanctions such behavior. Something is going seriously, seriously wrong. And actually, from the Gnostic point of view, the demiurge and his archons and their human servants are always trying to steal the light. And if the light's growing amongst mankind today, then we can be sure that there are tremendous archonic forces working to suppress it. So if the Gnostic scenario were correct, let's conduct that mind exercise. If it were correct, then how might we expect these forces to manifest? I would say one of the ways they manifest is in the three Abrahamic religions, in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Not any longer true to their original sources, but hijacked by powerful and negative forces. They talk the talk of peace and love, but they walk the walk of hatred and division and fear. Look at what they do, not at what they say. Christianity was still burning people at the stake into the 17th century. Look at the terrible scandals within the Catholic Church. Look at the stoning of women to death in Islam. In the name of God. Again, another act of brutal human sacrifice is taking place. What decent, loving God would ever sanction such incredible, vile stupidity as stoning a woman to death? Why? Because she looked at another man? This is insane. The mass murder of the Yazidis by that horrible death cult called the Islamic State. The Yazid religion has its roots in ancient Gnosticism. We've all seen this unfold in the last year or so. And then what about the state itself, our governments? Aren't they also archonic agents? Aren't they also in the business of suppressing human potential, telling us that they're acting in our own good, that they're taking responsibility for us, that we just have to do what they tell us and absorb their mind control? But what is it that governments do? You know, they spread fear and hatred and suspicion. And whenever they feel threatened, they press the patriotism button. This is a controversial thing to say, but I personally don't like patriotism. I think patriotism is a really bad thing. Because it teaches us and it emotionally pulls our strings to attach ourselves to one particular fragment of the human race. And to say, oh, we are specially attached to that fragment, and we're actually quite ready to kill everybody else in its name. When in truth, we are all brothers and sisters, all of us. There is no difference between any of us. Go to any remote family in the Arab world, talk to them about their daily concerns. You'll find they're just absolutely like us. Why do we need to be at war? Why do we need to be dragged into these meaningless fights which attach us to meaningless identities? It's time for the human race to move on from that. Don't get me wrong. I am not in favor of one world government. I'm in favor of no government. Minimal government, the least possible government. But thank you. But what I am in favor of is the recognition of the universal human family, and that's where our patriotism should attach to all our fellow human beings, all the time. And then what about the big corporations? No food shall be grown that we don't own. It's a parody, of course, but I mean, it's kind of true. Monsanto is a diabolical force in the world today. And the big corporations are. And what about the news media, which are just filling us with these dreadful images day in, day out, and leading us to fear and suspect one another, and multiplying every issue in which fear can grow. Let's remember that. Bill Hicks said it right. The opposite of fear is love. That's what we have to do. We have to replace fear with love. We have to not allow our strings to be pulled by these archonic forces. And I would say that they've created a kind of consciousness monopoly, and by giving an effective monopoly to a single state of consciousness and enforcing that monopoly with draconian criminal sanctions may in the long run actually be dangerous or possibly even suicidal for a human society. The alert problem-solving state of consciousness is very good at these kind of things: commerce, politics, warfare. It has its place, as I've made clear. But we've all realized that the promises it makes of universal prosperity are not true. We've all been through the bust of the last decade. We've all understood that the banks can't go on magically printing electronic money forever. The system is actually rotten at the core. And it's rotten at the core also. What kind of society, other than a society that has actually gone insane, could tolerate the levels of pollution that we gaily allow, and utter madness to have nuclear weapons? It's astonishing the way that nuclear weapons continue to be portrayed as a rational solution to some kind of problem. There's nothing rational about nuclear weapons. They're just horribly dangerous, murderous, poisonous things. And they should not exist. And if our society were sane, if it were actually not completely insane and unconscious, we would never have gone down that path. Or if we went down it, we'd have pulled back from it and stopped. They're awful things. We can't even solve the problem of hunger in the world today. And of course, we're cutting down the rainforests. Mad thing to do. This is the society that tells us we mustn't take psychedelics. The very same society is causing all of these catastrophes in the world today. We cannot, it's a fundamental economic problem in the Amazon. It would be relatively easy to solve. What we need to do, what the world community needs to do, is to say, let's meet the needs of the people of the Amazon, and in return, they garden the Amazon and look after it as a global heritage. Now, we can raise, just trillions of dollars, countless the zeros, you lose sight of them, for warfare, for weapons, for attacking one another, for all of those things associated with hatred and fear and suspicion. But up till now, we do absolutely nothing about the destruction of the rainforests. Once again, I would say we're looking at a society that's gone mad, and it's gone mad because we've elevated one particular state of consciousness above all others, and we're refusing to embrace other states of consciousness. And we're not going to move to a new state of consciousness using the old one with its archonic constraints. The Gnostic system's been shattered by persecution. I think it's to shamanism that we need to turn in order to relearn our fundamental humanity. To the Amazon jungle, where there are still uncontacted tribes. That's what Amazonian shamans told me, that the sickness of the advanced urban society is very simple. We've severed our connection with spirit. We need to reconnect to spirit, and we need to reconnect to it soon, and we are desperately sick. We need a remedy, a powerful remedy. It's not something we're easily going to be able to do ourselves, and that's why, in a kind of reverse missionary activity, shamans from the Amazon are traveling all over the Western world offering their remedy, which is ayahuasca. Which you can encounter in any major Western city now. Not without problems, let me be clear, not without problems. Some who are delivering ayahuasca, some who are administering ayahuasca ceremonies are not well motivated. This is a problem that we in the West are going to have to get to grips with if we're going to benefit from these powerful medicines. We are going to have to get to grips with the right social framework in which they may be used with wise advice in a nurturing and loving setting, not by people who are out to make money or to dominate us psychically. It's not all rosy in the garden of ayahuasca by any means. But when you enter that visionary state, and these are the paintings of Pablo Amaringo, an ayahuasca shaman, and showing what ayahuasca visions look like for those who've not experienced them. Something else about ayahuasca. This is the work of Alex Gray. He's a visionary artist in upstate New York. His art has been transformed by his experiences with ayahuasca. This is the late Robert Venosa, again, a visionary artist whose work was transformed by ayahuasca. He used to live in Boulder. His partner, Martina Hoffman, is another brilliant visionary artist inspired by ayahuasca. And what their paintings show is that the universal experience of ayahuasca, it's about the sacred, magical, enchanted nature of all creation and the interdependence of material and spiritual realms. You know, we all know that's true in theory, but what ayahuasca tends to do, used right in the right setting, what it tends to do is to bring that home to you with the force of a compelling revelation. You get it. And that's why I say that anyone who wants to run for political office should be required to have a dozen sessions of ayahuasca first. Have those dozen sessions, then see if you still want to be president. And if you do, you might be an interesting candidate. Life review is part of the ayahuasca experience. You see your life. You see the impact that you've had on others. That's why people often break into tears during ayahuasca sessions, because you suddenly get it. You actually aren't that nice. You know, you said some really hurtful things to that other person. And suddenly you're inside that other person's psyche and you experience the pain that you caused them. And my God, it's a revelation. And you know, people say it's just like it's too easy with ayahuasca. It's not true. It's incredibly difficult with ayahuasca. What's actually happening, the real work begins after the session. You get the revelations. Do you then integrate them into your life, or do you fall back into the old bad habits? That's the thing. That's where the work begins. That's where you have to exert your will and make decisions. It's probably why ayahuasca is one of the most successive anti-addiction agents in the world today. There's a clinic called Taquihuasi at Tarapoto in Peru, where they bring heroin and cocaine addicts. More than 50% of them leave a month later completely free of addiction and never return to it. A number of clinics around the world forget about methadone, you know, which is just another form of heroin. Forget about methadone. Ayahuasca is incredibly effective at ending addictions. It appears to operate at two levels, both physically and psychically, that the addict realizes, and I have some experience of this myself, the addict realizes the wrong path that he or she is going down. It comes as a revelation, and once you get it, you don't want to be an addict anymore. So the spirit of ayahuasca most frequently encountered as a creative guide, as a healer, and a moral teacher. And ayahuasca is part of a global system, of carefully preserved and protected body of knowledge, which is to do with shamanism. And the essence of shamanism is altered states of consciousness, trance states, however they are induced. And there are multiple ways of inducing them. It is the altered state of consciousness that is key to all shamanism in the world today. And entities are very common in altered states of consciousness. Shamans report encounters with intelligent supernatural entities who they construe as spirits. They sometimes might take human form. Very often they take the form of an animal or of a therianthrope, a creature that's part animal and part human. And shamans in all cultures also report that they themselves transform into animals and therianthropes. The mystery is that many of the experiences that shamans report with spirits are very similar to encounters with quote-unquote aliens reported by tens of thousands of people in the West who believe they've been abducted by aliens. And indeed, shamans frequently depict UFOs and aliens in their paintings of their ayahuasca visions. So what is going on here? If you want to know about the phenomenology of shamanism, read Mircea Eliade's huge book on the subject. And if you want to know about the phenomenology of alien abductions, read John Mack, who I had the privilege of knowing, or David Jacobs, or Bud Hopkins. I'm going to rush through this now because I'm running short of time, although I didn't start until quarter of an hour later, so I feel I've got another quarter of an hour to go. Roughly. So the spirits shamans encounter most frequently appear in the form of animals, birds, or fish, or therianthropes. And interestingly, this turns out to be the case with UFO abductees, that Virginia Horton remembers talking to an intelligent gray deer. Another American reports seeing a deer looking through her window. Another sees a wolf just before she's abducted. John Mack summarizes the aliens appear to be consummate shapeshifters, often appearing initially to abductees as animals. Owls, eagles, raccoons, and deer are among the creatures the abductees have seen initially. There's the sense of being floated up into the sky that shamans report, or specifically climbing threads of light. Again, UFO abductees report the same phenomena. Shamans think they're being abducted by spirits. UFO abductees think they're being abducted by aliens, but what they're actually experiencing is the same thing. Being abducted underwater is very common with shamanism, or into caves, and that is also very common with the UFO abductee testimony. Shamans undergo an ordeal, a kind of surgery where they're taken apart, disassembled. Objects may be inserted under their skin. They may be pierced with arrows or spears. It's a universal theme of the shamanic ordeal. Rock crystals and other objects are inserted into their bodies. Well, lo and behold, that is also the universal aspect of the alien abduction phenomenon. Painful piercing, surgical procedures, implants often involving crystal are all common experiences of UFO abductees. Shamans are just always having sex with spirits. I told this joke before, but I do actually know a shaman in the Amazon whose wife has left him because of his relationships in the spirit world. He's got kids over there, you know. And again, this is very common with the UFO abductee experience, that UFO abductees have sex with aliens. They have hybrid babies. They're constantly re-abducted to nurture those offspring. Here we have the left hand. Is actually that became the front cover of Rick Strassman's book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule. But it shows, it's Alex Gray's painting, it shows that eyes are a common feature of the DMT experience. Weirdly, this 12th century Rupertsberg Codex also shows eyes in the sky. And we see a kind of impregnation taking place. There's a fetus in this woman's womb. And what do we see up here, if not a little elf with a mushroom? Yeah? And some similarities to UFO sightings there as well. What is going on here? 1720, there's a flying saucer in the sky, rays of light coming down, Art de Gelder, baptism of Christ or shamanic initiation. Maria Sabina, Mexican shaman, mushroom shaman, she was given a book by a spirit. She was illiterate, but actually she found she could read that book, and she learned many things from it. She said that she had entered the world where everything is known. Spirit wouldn't let her keep the book. She came back to a normal state of consciousness. The book was gone. Betty Hill was given a book when she was abducted. She wasn't allowed to bring it back. Likewise, Betty Andreasson. And UFO abductees and shamans often feel they return with healing powers. There's a curious link between fairies and elves and aliens. The go-to book is Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallée, written in 1969. My own book, Supernatural, takes on the dossier of information that he'd prepared up to 1969 and brings it forward into the 21st century. This is a fantastic book. It's the first book to really show how fairies and aliens are incredibly similar. Fairies, after all, were in the business of abduction. Touch the fairy ring, you'd be off into fairyland. You might think you'd been there for an afternoon, but when you came back, 300 or 400 years had passed. Alien abductions have got a bit kinder. You get 5 hours of missing time now. Fairies could be cruel. They tortured people, but they also could be kind and gave gifts and healing powers. Fairies had the power of flight, used flying vehicles of various kinds, construed as flying boats, flying castles, etc. Fairies would often abduct us underground into the hollow hills. Mushrooms, by the way, there, Amanita muscaria. Down here, psilocybes, I expect. Fairies could take the form of therianthropes, part animal, part human in form, like Melusine, this feared medieval fairy who abducted human babies. So what is all this? Is this all just like weird figments of the human imagination, or is it possible reality is more complicated than we think? You know, what are we doing here? What journey are we on? What is consciousness? What happens to me when I die? What is reality? Consciousness is the greatest mystery of science, as is the mystery of how I'm going to finish this talk in 10 minutes, but I think it's possible. I think it's possible. Consciousness is the greatest mystery of science. We know the brain is involved in it. Many materialist scientists will tell you, of course, the brain makes consciousness, a bit like a generator makes electricity. They'll tell you, of course, that's the case. It's just patently obvious, because if you damage somebody's brain, or if somebody's brain is damaged by an illness, a certain area of their consciousness is affected. It seems obvious that the brain makes consciousness, but maybe it's not so obvious. Maybe the relationship of the brain to consciousness is more like the relationship, I'm using an analogy here, of the TV signal to the TV set. Maybe the brain is a receiver or transceiver of consciousness. Sure enough, if you damage your TV set, the picture is going to be damaged. It's not going to be working properly anymore. But the signal won't be affected. The signal will still be there. And maybe that's what's going on. Maybe the brain is manifesting consciousness onto the physical plane rather than creating consciousness. Maybe consciousness isn't an epiphenomenon of brain activity at all. Maybe the brain is the transceiver. Albert Hofmann, the discoverer of LSD. Does everybody know the story? He was working for Sandoz, and he was doing a lot of extracts of ergot, the different synthetics prepared from ergot. And one day, he'd been working in the lab, and he got on his bike to ride home, and he suddenly found himself in a completely strange experience. Everything was changed. He thought he was dying, as a matter of fact. He went home, slept it off, woke up the next morning and realized he had absorbed one of those substances through his fingers. And he thought he'd experiment with it, since he didn't die. So he went back to the lab and took what turned out to be a gigantic dose of LSD, because you only need a very, very small amount. And he had profound experiences which altered the way he thought about many, many things. Albert Hofmann, by the way, lived to the age of 102. And he was a regular user of LSD. And eventually, LSD was actually sold by Sandoz for quite a long time, until it was made illegal in the 1960s. Anyway, he sees that reality is inconceivable without an experiencing subject. You need the exterior world, the sender, and you need the receiver. And the emanations of the exterior world are registered by the antennae of the sense organs, become consciousness. Maybe there's more to the exterior world than our five senses, even extended by scientific instruments, are able to receive. William Blake was certainly of that point of view. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern. William James, the brother of the novelist Henry James, had some psychedelic experiences with nitrous oxide. And they changed the way he thought about things. He thought, actually, that if we don't have those experiences, that science doesn't take account of those experiences. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness quite disregarded. At any rate, they forbid a premature closing of our accounts with reality. And I feel that that's what materialist science has done. It has prematurely closed our accounts with reality. Materialist science does great work, but to claim that there is nothing more than matter, that spirit does not exist, that's not science, that's voodoo. Aldous Huxley saw the brain as a reducing valve, cutting out most of reality. And he saw the psychedelics, and certain people are naturally gifted in this way, as having a bypass to the reducing valve, that the psychedelics allowed a temporary bypass. He called them gratuitous graces. And through these bypasses there flows something more than, and above all, something different from, the carefully selected utilitarian material which our narrowed individual minds regard as a complete, or at least sufficient, picture of reality. Hoffman again. The notion that the brain is a receiver, and as such it can be tuned into other wavelengths. Maybe we're tuned into a particular wavelength, but we're not, which is corresponding to normal everyday reality. but the endless variety and diversity of the universe correspond to infinitely many different wavelengths. Depending on the adjustment of the receiver, many different realities can become conscious. And the first work that was really done to explore this was Rick Strassman's work at the University of New Mexico. Highly recommend his book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule. Rick managed to wrangle permission from the DEA to give DMT to human volunteers at the University of New Mexico, and the results were quite extraordinary. There was a possibility that Rick would have been a speaker here, but unfortunately he had to cancel. He's an amazing man. His volunteers, given DMT by intravenous infusion, and then interviewed about their experiences, reported all kinds of interesting things. Implants into their bodies, long fiber optic things that they were putting into my veins. Carl met a lot of elves, very prankish, ornery elves. Lucas suddenly found himself hovering over a space station, and there were presences inside it guiding him to a platform and entities inside the space station. And he was confused, and he opened his eyes. As you can see, excuse me, this is a cave painting from Tanzania, but this is me drawing this. As you can see, I can't draw. Words are my thing. Drawing, I'm really hopeless. But this was an ayahuasca vision in the Amazon jungle. And suddenly I met a gray, an ET, and he's above me, and there's a flying saucers up there. And I'm filled with terror, and I know they're going to abduct me. So I open my eyes and I shout, "No!" And they vanished like that. Of course, what I should have done was kept my eyes closed and shouted, "Yes!" I shouldn't have allowed my fear to overwhelm me, and I've never had that particular experience again. But the point is that, really intriguingly, a number of Rick's volunteers, who were not comparing notes, reported the same thing. They reported in the DMT state that they had met entities who said to them, "We're so pleased you've discovered this technology. Now we can communicate with you more easily." It gives me chills to think of that. You know, we're spending all this money exploring outer space. What about inner space and where that leads us? DMT is found, as I've said, in human beings. It's most likely produced in the pineal gland. And Rick's controversial notion is that UFO abductees are people who spontaneously overproduce DMT. And he is not saying that that means their experiences are just hallucinations. He is actually saying he believes their experiences are completely real. We just need to widen our definition of reality. By conceiving of the brain as a receiver of information, one can accommodate the biological model of changing brain function with a chemical. At the same time, it allows for the possibility that what is being received, while not usually perceptible, is consistently and verifiably existent. And he's coined this notion of channel normal. That's what we're all tuned into most of the time. And what DMT does is it changes the channel, the wavelength setting. And these worlds are usually invisible to us in our instruments and are not accessible using our normal state of consciousness. However, just as likely as the theory that these worlds exist only in our minds is that they are in reality outside us and freestanding. If we simply change our brain's receiving abilities, we can comprehend and interact with them. Many of you will have heard me give this analogy before. But the materialist scientist tells you that the experiences you have with DMT are just a product of your brain activity. There is no reality to them. Your brain chemistry and electricity have changed. You can actually see that on an MRI scanner, and they reduce your visions to that. It's just those physical changes inside the brain. There's nothing more to them than that. And this, of course, is like so much in the locked-in mainstream is incredibly narrow-minded and stupid thinking. Because there's the analogy. A telescope. Take it, point it at a distant star, focus it. Eventually the star will come into view. In that process, physical changes take place inside the barrel of the telescope in the relationship between the lenses. you'd be completely wrong to say that the star is those physical changes inside the barrel of the telescope. Of course it's not. The star is real. Those physical changes allow you to see it, and that's the suggestion. That's what's happening with DMT. I would like to see much more research being done into this. By all means, let's continue to explore outer space, but let's explore inner space as well. It may be the case that we exist in a multidimensional reality. I absolutely believe we do. And we should be using the best tools of the best science to investigate this mystery and see where it goes to, rather than standing back and saying, oh, it's just drugs, we don't want to know about that. Fortunately, there is a change taking place. Psilocybin, MDMA, and other psychedelics are being taken seriously now. They are being used very effectively to cure, to heal people of their people with terminal cancers, of their anxiety about death. MDMA has been used incredibly effectively to help veterans to overcome post-traumatic stress disorder. I happened to share a stage with a US Marine last year in New York, who had suffered terribly with PTSD. He was actually a machine gunner. He had shot people to bits in the course of his duties, and he was just haunted by what he'd done. And he, luckily enough for him, was enrolled in an experimental study with MDMA, which we call ecstasy. He was enrolled in an experimental study with MDMA, and it resulted in a complete radical healing. He totally recovered and became a person who is now out and advocating this. And the point he made is this: in the Marines, we are taught never to leave a buddy behind on the battlefield. We're taught that. He made this so beautifully clear. And he said, I feel, because I was lucky enough to be enrolled in that study, but my buddies are not enrolled in that study, I feel I'm leaving them behind. And we shouldn't be doing that. This opportunity should be given to everyone. New therapeutic work involving these amazing plant medicines is underway. These guys, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, they admitted frankly they'd never have invented the Apple computer if it hadn't been for their experiences with LSD. They used to hire programmers on the basis of their experience with LSD. Francis Crick, the discoverer of DNA, used to take LSD regularly in the late 40s and early 50s when it was legal. And he admitted that he had first observed the double helix. He'd first really got it. He'd first really understood what the double helix was while he was under the influence of LSD. So we have more than the alert problem-solving state of consciousness to thank for that breakthrough. Whatever's going on here, it's obvious that these substances are not simply brain candy. They are not trivial. They're not, something slight. Used in the right way, responsibly, with care, in a nurturing setting, they can be absolutely transformatory. And what's at stake is not a small thing. A struggle is underway for the future direction of human consciousness. It's crazy that we live in a society that will send us to prison if we make time-honored use of these time-honored sacred plants. Yet surely the exploration and the expansion of the miracle of our consciousness is the essence of what it is to be human. I would say by demonizing and persecuting altered states of consciousness today, we may even be denying ourselves the next vital step in our own evolution. Exploration and the expansion of the miracle of our consciousness is the essence of what it is to be human. I would say by demonizing and persecuting altered states of consciousness today, we may even be denying ourselves the next vital step in our own evolution. And one thing's clear: if we're to heal the planet, we're going to have to re-establish contact with spirit. And if we're going to do that, thank you. If we're going to do that, we have to regain sovereignty over our own consciousness. Government, you may not enter here. This is not a place for government to patrol. We have to regain sovereignty. And if we don't banish fear and practice love, who knows, maybe we will become the next lost civilization. Thank you.
What tremendous courage and what a brilliant speaker. Another round of applause for Graham Hancock. You are among family. I want to remind everyone that Graham will be featured speaker in our Arkansas gathering. Please join us in Arkansas.